Shalom, welcome to Out of Africa Torah session. My name is Tatra Cohen. This week we are on Parashat 44. We have started the new book of Deuteronomy. And today we are in the very first Parashat, that's Devarim, words in English. And it's coming from the book of Deuteronomy chapter 1 all the way to chapter 3 verse 22. In this Torah portion, we are told it takes 11 days from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea. But instead, the children of Israel took nearly 40 years. And that already presents a problem. Now you would wonder, what took them so long? Apart from that, other than Joshua, Caleb, and Moses, no one had a memory of entering Egypt. No memory of receiving the Torah itself. Also, nobody had a memory of many important things that transpired, especially in their earliest journey from Egypt, or what happened in Egypt, or even what happened before Egypt. You can tell it's a whole new generation. Now we see in this Torah portion that Moses begins his review of the history. In other words, he saw history was very important, especially for this new generation. If you know where you are coming from, you would appreciate where you are going. And that's exactly what Moses did, to start giving them history. At the same time, he also rebukes them. It seems they had done something that offended Moses and offended God. And in their crime, we see by the words of Moses. Now, did Moses mean the Jewish people did not believe in God in his rebuke? It seems he had a crime against them. And in Moses' view, the crime of Israel was refusal to enter the land. They were working against God, in other words. God had said you should go and take the land, and they were not ready, or they didn't want to go and take the land. And that automatically becomes a problem. Assume you are reading from Deuteronomy chapter 1 from verse 26, which states, I'll read from my Bible here. Nevertheless, you would not go up, but rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. 27 says, and you complained in your tents and said, because the Lord hates us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites, to destroy us, to kill us, in other words. And that's exactly what they thought. God had actually delivered them from Pharaoh to come and kill them. A very weird mentality. Unfortunately, this is the same mistake you and I make even to this day. We think God has taken us all this way so that he can just kill us. Unfortunately, they were working against what God was actually doing. And this was their crime, according to verse 26 and 27, in the very words of Moses, their co-leader. Meanwhile, our sages also tell us that 3 events which had already happened confirmed that God was with them. In other words, there was no need to doubt God after these 3 events. Number 1, when Moses came to the elders and said to them, God came to me and he has seen your suffering. In other words, our sages tell us that that very event provide us with sympathy. God was sympathizing with them. And it didn't end there. God also acted upon the sympathy which he felt for them. And the second thing which we are told by our sages, which was proof that God was with them, it's the splitting of the Red Sea, of the sea. And if you remember the sea, the miracle, how it so happened according to the scripture, they saw the power of God being at display. And this, according to our sages, was action. Apart from God sympathizing with them, God was ready to act. And this is the action which they saw. Everybody saw this miracle. And they praised and they danced. it was the second reason they should have believed in what God was doing. And the third thing our sages tell us is, at the Mount Sinai, God says, I will come to you. In other words, we see how dedicated God was. It's like a man who is saying to the bride, I am going to come, I'll make myself available. In other words, you leave everything that you can leave, or what you were working on, what you are doing, simply to be available. In that availability, that dedication which God says. So we see that in these three things, sympathy, action, and dedication, were enough reasons for them to believe in God. In other words, they had no reason whatsoever to doubt what God was doing or what God had promised them to do. Now we see the real journey of faith actually begins when you believe that God exists. It's like many people, I have so many conversations, especially here in Africa. People tell me, I believe. But the real point, or the journey of your faith begins from the day you believe that God exists. Believing God exists, it's not really faith. But faith is actually what you do after you believe that God exists. So we see, according to the Hebrew, we see that the word faith is used not to describe human feelings. Like, I trust you, I know you can do, okay. That's just the human standard. But the word faith means more than that. Faith is the idea of steadfast. It is willingness to trust God even when you confront your fears. Like, I'm going through these difficult times, but my faith in Him is steadfast. So we see that this is exactly what Moses accused them. Lack of faith. They were supposed to have believed in God and they didn't. And Moses finds this to be the sin or the error of Israel, which he wanted to rebuke them in. So Moses continues and say, they weren't stable in their faith, in dealing with God, that is. They were wavering. And that instability which they had was the bigger challenge which Moses saw. So Moses says, look at your experiences. Look what God has done to you all these years. You have every reason to have faith in Him, yet you don't. And that God had a problem. Now, if you were reading from the book of Habakkuk chapter 2 from verse 4, it says, the righteous shall live by faith. And this is really interesting. Many people quote this scripture today. And we see that the problem with the children of Israel, they had no faith. No wonder God called them the evil generation. It's amazing. God exists. The idea here, or the talk which Moses had with them, was not to talk about or doubting the existence of God. All of them knew God existed. God is with them. The problem is something which Moses outlines. What does it mean to have faith from a Jewish perspective, you may wonder? In the mind of a Gentile, or faith according to Gentile, is just a mere mental exercise, like knowing that God exists and also knowing that God will act, like you say, okay, He's going to provide. And unfortunately, this group which Moses is addressing on this Torah portion, Devarim, words, they knew pretty much that God exists and He will. They never had any challenge with that because they had seen God doing. So they never had any problem with that. Now, the Hebrew word faith is emunah. It is an action-oriented word meaning support. It demands action on the one who supports God. It is not knowing that God will act, but rather, I will do what I can to support God. This is seen in Exodus chapter 17 from verse 12, which says, if I read, but Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him. And he sat upon it, and Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on this side and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady, emunah, until the going down of the sun. It's like that very thing that happened when Israel was fighting this other of their enemies, and the hands of Moses were getting tired and so forth. We knew that this battle was actually being done by God. So what was really happening here is emunah. They had to support what God was doing. So it is the support, the emunah of Aaron and Hur that held Moses' arms, not the support or the emunah of Moses. When we say have faith in God, we should be thinking, I will do what I can to support God. In other words, I am for the agenda of God no matter what it takes. Without faith, you delay your own destiny. You destroy the hope and the relationship God is building with you. And by the way, do you have faith yourself? Are you in support of what God is doing? Or are you actually in contrast to what God is doing, like the children of Israel whom Moses was addressing this place? Are you part of what God is doing? Believing in Him is not enough. It is not faith. Faith is actively supporting what God is doing. And that's what we find on this Torah portion, emunah. Moses was simply having the challenges with the children of Israel because they never had emunah. They did not believe in what God was doing. They did not believe. They did not support what God was doing, though they knew He would do it, though they knew He was able to do it.